Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter. Welcome, everyone. If you enjoy the show, please consider subscribing on your favorite podcast listening platform and YouTube. You can now also check out the full video episode on X. Please also consider sharing your favorite episodes and leaving a review. If you do that and tag me or send me a screenshot, I will enter you in a monthly raffle for a free 30-minute consultation with me. For full episode details, including notes, timestamps, transcripts, and the show Patreon page, and other ways to support the show, please head over to my website at zachbitter.com. There you can find all my coaching services, including some new offerings for 2025. You can also sign up for my Substack newsletter, where I have been publishing my training journal weekly, as well as other topic-based posts. If you have any questions or feedback, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on my website or at hpopodcast@gmail.com. A big thanks to Element, Delta G Ketones, Currents, and Maui Nui Venison for supporting the podcast. A full description of how I use these products can be found at the end of the episode. Discounts, promotions, and details can also be found in the show notes and at the end of the episode. Jeff, thanks a bunch for taking some time to chat with me. I was kind of just looking over some of the stuff I wanted to talk to you about, and I went down the Jeff Garmire rabbit hole, and I usually do this when I have a guest on. I'll listen to some podcasts, some work that they've done and all that stuff, just to kind of get an idea of where the topic is that's going to be interesting. And with yours, as I was going down the rabbit hole, I quickly diverted down one channel, which was the Trail TMZ and the Jeffrey Awards, which took up a lot of time, but it was very much worth the while. So I do want to chat a little bit about just kind of your style with media and social media and just your YouTube channel and things like that, because I think you've got a really interesting approach with it all. I believe one thing you mentioned was that in the ultra running space, we've got this sort of growing amount of media, but it's just a lot, in some cases, just a lot of the same stuff. We just have more of it. And you wanted to kind of bring a new fun aspect into that space, which I think you're very much doing.
Thanks. Yeah. I didn't know where you were going to go when you mentioned the rabbit hole. I mean, there's some weird old YouTube videos out there. There's all kinds of media from the past, but yeah, I think the big thing is when I don't know how you even frame it, but when I got into this sport, or at least was a fan and stuff, it was I was setting FKTs and things, but there wasn't any money in it. So the whole point was it had to be rewarding in some other way. And for some people, that's pushing limits or redefining things or getting the most out of themselves. And I loved that, but it also had to be fun with how much money I was putting in, especially compared to how little money I was making, that I had to really enjoy it. And I think adopting that mindset when no one was watching and no one really cared, that just helped when I slowly developed an audience and a few different platforms. That's really the only style I like to look at any of these things. Is it's really fun when someone's really intense and racing really hard, such as a Hayden Hawks, but you can also have fun and point out how that's really fun to watch as well. It's not like everyone has to have this fun, jokey personality, but we should at least acknowledge the fun in watching greatness or the fun in someone's personality or something. Is, I think, just keeping that through line of fun somewhere in the sport, because the 99% of people that do it, that kind of fund the entries for elites and help these races continue to go, are usually in it because it's some aspect of a hobby or fun or entertainment or something that they want to spend their time doing. And the best way to keep doing those things is if you're having fun in some way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's one of those things where it's sort of when you get into the space that I think we have a lot of similarities in how kind of we've approached the sport, where there's the competition side of things, which we obviously want to prepare for and do our best in, but there's also this sort of, well, what else am I going to do during that, as well as prepare myself for a point in time when I'm no longer competitive and I'm not maybe signing brand deals and things like that. So what's kind of what are things that I can do that are still fun and rewarding that kind of work alongside that? And it's just an interesting world right now with that too, with like the growth of social media and YouTube
Mhm.
and podcasting and things like that, where there are a lot of options to kind of brand build and story tell and dive into that stuff and create something that's maybe a little more sustainable than a typical professional athlete's career.
Yeah, and I think the big thing is you are a better asset to brands that you work with too if there's more depth to your personality, to your character, other than just your race results. And there's probably just such a narrow sliver at on the top of that hill where you can just stand on your race results, and everyone on those tiers under it has to offer something more. And maybe that is great insight or coaching, relatability, or just knowledge, or it can also be fun, entertainment, or just the willingness for people to give you their time and attention too. And I think I come across a lot as be happy go lucky and stuff, but it is also like thought out. Is it's going to help me be able to have a career and a life a lot longer than my best results in this sport if I continue to be relatable, have opinions that are fun, spark conversation, and say hi and am nice to people during races, even if I'm having my worst race out there. So I always keep that in the back of my mind, is if I'm just a better person, then, sometimes the easy way out of I'm having a bad day, so I'm going to be grumpy and not so nice, is that easy way out only comes back to hurt you. So that mindset of just, if you are a good person and kind of true to what you like, which for me, it's fun, enjoyment, laughter, jokes, that kind of thing, then it just really snowballs into maybe it's more of a career covering the sport or putting out media or content or something like that as I get older. But it opens those doors a lot more when you can't just offer superior race results or FKTs to a brand. Cause, I think our time in our prime is so short when we look back at things too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. And I think even like if we narrow down on like some of those inputs too, where it's like with coaching, I've looked at it through this lens now too. It's like, sharing those experiences where it's like, all right, I had a bad day and I had to problem solve, or this went wrong and I made a mistake. I made a decision I don't want to, that I'm not really comfortable with. These are things that most ultra runners are dealing with, like bad races, DNFs, like asking myself, did I really need to drop out? Was I mentally weak? Was that knee really bothering me that badly? Or did I just want to
Mm-hmm.
quit? Kind of like these sort of things that are kind of going through people's mind when like someone like yourself who's had a lot of success, especially in the longer ultra side of things, I think people hearing that's just the reality, and it's not just all about kind of how great can you be all the time. It makes you more relatable. And I've had I try to pay attention to this stuff sometimes too, where like people will talk to me about coaching or something like that, and every once in a while someone will say like, oh, I didn't realize you just coached like normal runners. I'm like, that's like the vast majority of my coaching clients are like, busy professionals, families, the whole thing, when they're, the running thing is a passion and something they're really interested in. They want to do the best they can within the framework of their life. And I think just by being open like that, I think you make yourself a little more relatable, and then people are maybe a little less kind of shy about approaching you with potentials of working with them and things like that too. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in that.
Yeah. And I think coaching too, the most fun people to coach are those where running is a complement to their life, or the ultra marathon has to fit into having a family and a job. Because then my job as a coach is, it's really fun because I'm working with someone really motivated, but they have this amount of time they can commit. So it's like, how are we going to best maximize this? We got to figure out your strengths and weaknesses and coach to those, and then prepare you for this race based on what's also going on in your life. And I think that's the most fun. Whereas when you coach someone that is maybe younger, or an elite, or with a lot more time, it's like, well, I can do anything ever. You can give me as much as you want. And it's like, well, there's no parameters here. Like, we got to explore some of these things. You're coming with a blank slate. It's a little more fun when we know how running really slots into your life versus how you think it's going to slot into your life.
Yeah, I think that comes back to the consistency is the big variable in most cases, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like there's more than one way to prepare for these events. And I'd be curious your thought on this, or just your experience with this too, because when I first got into the sport and started getting some notoriety and started coaching people, there was I always felt kind of like I was trying to talk to people in through the lens of like, you can do this. Like people were looking at, like, say, like the 100-mile distance as something like, oh, I could never do a 100-miler. And it might be someone who's like very equipped, like their sub 3 hour marathon runner and things like that. Like you can definitely do a 100-miler.
Mm-hmm.
And there was kind of like this maybe hurdle to get over to talk people into thinking that it was even an option they had available to them. And as the sport's grown, and I think just different groups of people have come into it, and then we have these like kind of big characters that have come in from non-traditional backgrounds, like the Goggins and Cam Hanes of the world, that I get a lot of people coming to me with like, oh, I want to do this 100-miler, I want to do this like Cocodona 250. And then I'm like, oh yeah, so what's your background like? And they were never even runner. It's like so now it's almost a reverse to some degree, where people are like, they're getting more open-minded to like, hey, I guess they just saw examples that they needed to see, and that people respond to like, if they can do it, I can do it. And when they see someone that maybe maps their lifestyle a little bit closer, they start wrapping their head around it and start giving themselves a chance.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge it's mostly a compliment to a lot of the storytelling out there that's emphasized a lot of different ranges of skill level, time, like front of the pack, mid pack, back of the pack, even like the live streams showing some of the final finishers too, is it makes it feel a lot more attainable. If you go back to the original, like Unbreakable, all the content from back then is front of the pack. And so you think that you just have to run every step of a 100-miler or run without a shirt or gels or water like Anton to be able to do this. And I think that a credit to the whole space in general is it showed a bunch of different people doing it a bunch of different ways and made it seem at least attainable in that respect too. It's almost swung the other way of, I think, people don't realize how much work some of the people have put in just to finish a few minutes before the cutoff too. I think I've noticed that a bit with coaching, is the very lofty goals that are achievable, but it's just like we need to set expectations on how much work and time does go into this, because it is really hard. Most people can do it, but it's got to be something you really want to do, not just you got inspired by seeing the live stream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. There's the part where the way I usually unpack it is like, let's first figure out like what your availability is to train. So we're
Mm-hmm.
fitting the schedule like you were describing. There's the whole life beyond the training. So we need to make that fit. And then like, I like to kind of tier it to some degree too, where it's like, okay, these are like your non-negotiables that like, you just can't really like sacrifice these. Like you can't stop showing up for work. You can't just ignore your family. There's things that we're going to have to work around. And that's just the reality of things. And then there's kind of these gray area things that they're kind of non-negotiable in the long term, in the sense that you're not going to give them up forever, but they might be temporarily negotiable. So it's like, well, maybe we work within a larger list of non-negotiables during some of the earlier phases of training.
Mm-hmm.
And then you make a sacrifice in like the final build that's a little more specific to the event, where you make some sacrifices on some activities or things that you enjoy that are going to be off the table maybe for a month or two. But then once you finish the race and kind of ease back into things, you can kind of get back to them too. So it doesn't feel like, oh, I got to give up all the stuff I like just to become an ultra runner.
Yeah, totally. And I think there's really those two mindsets, and people kind of realize where they fall within them too. Some people are like all in type A, this is what I want to be my hobby. And then others, as they get going, it's like, well, actually, I did really like playing pickleball on Wednesdays. Is there a way we can still work that in? And it's like, yeah, definitely. But it's all kind of like you have this much time to use, and it all kind of relates and we can use that. But it is, I think that's why coaching and even this sport in general is so fun, is that it can be such a balance. And especially the rise, and I think you posted on it too, of cross training in general, and especially biking and stuff too, and how that's working a lot more into training, even more than we would have thought a few years ago too, and how it complements. And I think just the rise of that really is going to help a lot of runners, like lifelong runners too, avoid more burnout too, because I think throwing these massive builds to like 200s and stuff is a lot. But if you're able to, take one of those longer days out in exchange for biking, it's just a lot more enjoyable experience, I think.
Yeah, that's a really fun topic for me. I think, and I think my theory, and I'd love to hear your take on this because you've got way more experience in like the multi-day stuff, is that the longer the event becomes and the lower in the intensity is, and then the more varied the terrain is, the more applicable something like a cross training modality or input becomes, because you're we're already doing multiple things on a course like Cocodona, where I think people think like, okay, I got to train running, but they're probably hiking the vast majority of that. So we're already not necessarily like really zeroing in on the skill set that they're going to use, or at least the ratios of it. So I like to think of it like that too. It's like, well, at a certain point when we add volume to your training plan, we should probably consider the hiking, walking portion of it, because if we can get you a few percentage points better at hiking, that could make up a pretty meaningful point in your progress. But then there's also things where I think like, like hiking uphill, running uphill isn't too unspecific to hopping on a bike and pedaling. And some of it's just kind of getting used to your body moving for long periods of time. And the actual impact that we drive from running isn't always necessary. So how do we remove some of that limiter and open up this world of cross training and all that stuff?
Just a quick reminder that Element Electrolytes is my go-to electrolyte source. They are offering a free sample pack with purchase for all HPO listeners at drinklmnt.com/HPO. They also just launched a new flavor, lemonade. Check it out risk-free with their 30-day money-back guarantee. Also, check out my full description of how I use Element at the end of the episode.
Totally, yeah. And my favorite thing to do, and my background is 20 years ago, starting with backpacking. I've coached some people who love backpacking, and we'll just find a few weekends and work that into the training plan, because it's loaded, weighted hiking, which is fairly similar to Cocodona, even more on the muscular side of putting more weight on them. They love it. It's enjoyable. It doesn't feel like a long run or anything. And we can get 40 miles into a weekend and they come back like motivated and everything. And I think when you do that and get a little bit less specific on like whether it's longer cycling or backpacking or more hiking, I do think you have to hit more of the speed work a little bit more regimented way as well. I think just because hitting that running motion and reinforcing the biomechanics too. But I love working in the backpacking side of it. I think it's just like the last couple of years been this revelation of like, yeah, let's not tell people to go do their long run if they love backpacking and want to do it. Let's just kind of restructure training so that they can get both these in. And then the mental side, which I think is so underrated in these 200-mile builds or even 100 miles, is just like, you have to be excited to race by the time you get to the race. And I think that can be a hard thing if it's just like every weekend it's a long run and can feel draining for people. And if we break that up with a couple backpacking trips, we didn't really lose too much training. And we also just created some stoke that just keeps going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And I think of that the same way, where you're on this like kind of a balancing act of doing enough of the long run stuff so that you're prepared, but not doing so much of it so that you show up at the start line like hating what you're about to do for sometimes days. It's like if you're already mad about what you're about to do because you've worn yourself out on it from training, it doesn't matter if you had some like picture perfect Strava build up to it. So I think you're spot on there. I think that's a lot of mental, and it's a lot of just feeling like it's there's a light at the end of the tunnel to some degree, and being able to kind of drop that stuff in is powerful.
Yeah. And I think the big thing I want to throw in a little caveat too is like there's so many different types of races, whether it's 200s or hundreds, and we've both done Javelina, and there's like a 200 miler in Nebraska and stuff too. So not all this stuff applies to everything perfectly. I think some of the general principles are pretty good, but yeah, something with a lot more running or a more stout cutoff or something, definitely focusing a little more on the long runs. But I do think in general, we're learning with some science and studies recently that things are a little more flexible as long as you're getting in the right aerobic zones, and you can develop different modalities of exercise. And it's really more complementary than exclusionary as people probably thought 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. I do want to kind of hop back on like the media side of things a little bit here, because you're a very unique individual in that I think you've done Cocodona every year since it started, right?
Yeah, I have an addiction.
So, yeah, that's one way to put it for sure. There's because I'm just curious on your thoughts on like this trend, which I imagine is just going to get more multifaceted and just continue to grow, is just kind of like that live stream coverage of it or the content. Because like the live stream of Cocodona this year, it was like a party in there where I mean, we had so many different characters from like kind of what we talked about, like the guys and gals who were like, okay, they're going to absolutely crush this thing and break the course record. And then we had these big kind of public figures like the Andy Glazes of the world
Hmm.
or the Cam Hanes of the world, where they're not going to be up front, but they're going to bring a huge group of people with them to watch and spectate and check in on them. It, I kind of see it kind of going a couple different directions, and then probably a bunch more is like you kind of have the main live stream, which is kind of going to be kind of that central hub. But then you're not going to see a ton of like Andy Glaze and a ton of Cam Hames on that necessarily, but those guys are probably bringing a bigger audience in their own little brand
Hmm.
to it, where like if they're out there like putting up short form stuff on Instagram over the course of it, you kind of have that side of it too. So it's like we almost have these like multi-channel inputs, or another way to look at it is you kind of have your formal channel, and then you also have all these kind of side channels that are kind of getting the word out, getting momentum around it, that revolve around like what they're able to do, or in some cases like they bring a camera crew out with them because they're that big of a personality, and then you kind of have that going on too. So like, what was it like kind of, because I'm trying to remember back the first Cocodona. I'm sure there was live coverage, but I don't remember if it was even on YouTube. It had to have been to some degree, but I'm sure it wasn't nearly to the capacity it is now. What was, I guess my question is just like, have you noticed like that trend kind of evolving over the years that you've done Cocodona, and your thoughts on kind of how that is now and how it's the direction it's heading?
Totally. Yeah. I think now it's sort of like Taylor Swift with the NFL, of like people bigger than Cocodona are bringing in way more people into the Cocodona atmosphere of, yeah, whether it's Andy Glaze or Cam Hanes has like, I don't know, a few million followers that we'll just call Cam Hanes as our Taylor Swift. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, the first year it's been really interesting. So I didn't do a lot of ultra running or especially racing for the longest time. I did Barkley in 2021, failed like everyone else. And then Jamil asked if I wanted to do the inaugural year of Cocodona. So Cocodona was actually my second ultra marathon ever. And my first was a 50K. So I didn't really know anything going on. I had to learn about drop bags and stuff, but they had a live stream and I didn't have a pacer or anything for most of it. So I called into the live stream and just talked to the people on the air. They were on YouTube, only probably a few hundred people watching. Still pretty good for the first year, but yeah, they just stayed up for like 48 hours or something, broadcasting straight, and pulled off the live stream. And every year it's really grown and they've dialed in the live stream too. And I think that's really is a testament to Aravaipa also broadcasts and live streams a lot of their other races. And I think that's really helped them to get the reps and practice to kind of nail this Cocodona live stream as, they embark on 5 days straight of coverage or whatever. But it's grown significantly, I think, from maybe Sally 2023 when Sally McRae did it. I think that was a pretty big jump. And then from there, it just kept snowballing. And it's really interesting to see because the point of how it's almost fragmented coverage of everyone can tune into the live stream, but then you can also pop over to influencers or people at the front. A lot of them will have someone posting stories and stuff too. Is it's created this thing as someone doing it where you almost have to have stuff going up on your own page or things going on your own social media to capitalize on the attention, because it's going to be the most attention you'll get for the entire year, probably even if you did Western States, because Cocodona is so unique that even the winner, you get to know them slowly over 2.5, 3 days, and you feel like you know about that person, you're rooting for them. Western States, it's sort of like just 13, 14 hours of knowing someone, then it's over. So you don't create that same personal bond through watching them suffer and run. So I think that's where Cocodona has really nailed it as far as storytelling and getting people super invested. Of you go to bed and you wake back up and you want to check out how your favorite runners are still doing out there. And that's really the beauty and what storytelling is all about, because you create some emotional connection rather than watching superior athletes run really fast at 100-miler and it's kind of over before you know too much about them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. And it also, I think, to your message there with or comparison with Western States and Cocodona, I think with Western states, that's gotten to be such a big competitive thing for that discipline where someone who's going to be in the lead at the end, we probably have a lead up on them
Mhm.
where like, they've most likely won a golden ticket race or were in the top 10 the year prior. And like we've had stories about them, we've had some time to dig and hear their background. Whereas with Cocodona, we have these folk kind of popping up sometimes where it's like, you they were doing well, but they maybe just flew under the radar. I think like Dan Green this year was interesting too because dude's fast. He broke 13
Yeah.
hours at Javelina, but he was kind of like a little bit on the outside looking in, where like he didn't break the course record, he was just behind it, and he didn't win it, or he was just outside the golden ticket for it. So it's like just a great performance, but not enough to like have the whole ultra community be like, oh yeah, Dan Green's here this year, look out. And then all of a sudden he just rips through that course and like you said, now we're all kind of catching up live, which has a totally different feel to it than, as Jim goes ripping through Forest Hill, it's like, oh, we know a ton about Jim,
Mhm.
or anyone who's in that position for the most part. So there's that difference for sure.
Yeah, and it's just so long. So much can happen. The front runners can drop out. Things can happen, fall back. It's just, yeah, just writes its own storylines. And that's what's so interesting about it is you don't know if someone like Dan Green can run 250 miles. And that's the fun. Is he going to do great or is he going to drop out? Mike Versteeg, he's won it, but he's dropped out a couple times too. It's like the endless wild card of you never know what's going to happen next. And sort of how it feels at 100 milers, and especially as they've gotten more dialed in, is there's a handful of people who have a pretty good shot of winning, and it's not very often you see someone unknown break into that. And I think at Cocodona, it feels like it's up for grabs a lot of the time between 20 or so people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like with the sport of ultra running too, we have this passion for that storyline. So like as different events get a lot more competitive pressure and we kind of lose a little bit of that, then there's this fascination of like, well, what's the one that hasn't quite got like every elite looking at it yet that's going to give us those kind of interesting like wild cards. It's kind of like almost like March Madness where you
Yeah.
get like that 14 seed who like gets to the final four or something like that. We want to still see that.
Yeah, and the coolest thing that's even better than traditional sports is the chat going on. Like there's interaction between other people, and even if you're watching a grainy video of someone near Sedona, you can just be reading and interacting with the chat and not as focused on the action if there's not a lot happening. I think that really builds on itself and shows that there's this community all, sometimes cracking jokes or asking about things. And it's a really cool place that they've created. I'm really interested to see what it becomes because it's only going to get bigger and wilder. And it's like, will it have a home outside of YouTube that kind of harnesses and captures that community maybe year round? Because current day, it's only five days of that, but it seems like there's this community that's interested in it year round. Every time I put up something related to Cocodona, it does way better than anything else. It's just something that spectators love, athletes love. It's a very unique event. It's amazing what Jamil came up with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to your point with like the chat too, I'll be curious how this evolves because right now it's big enough where there's enough going on in there where it's really exciting and there's a lot of moving parts that are fun to engage with and it kind of keep you there. But it's still just small enough where it's not like one of those live streams where you see like these big content
Mm-hmm.
creators who have live streams and it's just like a stream of text because people are going so ballistic on there, like you can't even see any one message because it moves so fast. I wonder like at some point it probably gets to that point where now all of a sudden you can't really see anything through that noise. I wonder like what you said, if there'll be like off channels where, or like different channels where you can chat about specific things, or yeah, maybe there's the Sally McRae fan club chat on one part. And then there's like the leader group chat or something like that, where you can kind of pick like which one you want to really kind of dive into the weeds for.
Yeah, it's just how big do they want to make it? Because I could see something where there's static cams at most, like a number of aid stations, and you can click into that because Andy Glaze is coming through and all his fans want to see that, and just different types of streams. I think it's really endless what they can do with it because it's so many miles long that you could do that type of thing. I think there's the opportunity, and they've started doing this like recaps at the end of the day, almost like a Sports Center type thing of like what happened and more I mean, they're hiring videographers out there to film stuff throughout the day or focus on individual athletes. It's pretty endless as far as the storytelling ability, which I think has been, if we just broaden it too, it's been really good for the sport of just seeing that there is so much demand for well told, or at least decently told stories, and people are interested in what's happening out there during races rather than just sort of like training montages and like vlogs and stuff. I think that a number of athletes have built and started YouTube channels in the last couple of years, really on the backs of seeing the success of the people just wanting to watch what is going on during a race, before a race, after a race. And I think it's good for the sport. I think it also just puts a ton on athletes' plates if it's like, well, not only do I have to train 20 hours a week between recovery and running and cross training and strength work, I also have to be putting out content of my own and showing my personality. And then at that point, it's like, well, will the pay that they're receiving ever catch up to the work that's required to be put in? So I don't know. It's creating this very unique moment in the sport where to keep up and to be relevant and with your competitors and right there with them, you need to do all these ancillary things to just running fast too.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I was thinking about that because I was listening to one of your episodes where you were talking about this, where there is like, there's the live stream, and now these organizations are getting big enough and capable of getting us more access where, you might be running alongside you with a video camera recording you go through an aid station, catching you in a low point or something like that. And it's almost like this interesting dynamic of like, how much is that just, okay, you signed up for the event, if you're doing well, or if you're a hot story for one reason or the other, we're going to get you on camera and we're going to ask your crew and we're going to ask you questions and we're going to just drive content that way, versus like you as the athlete saying like, or having some parameters there.
Mm-hmm.
And then like that sort of opens up a whole nother aspect too of what you were talking about, where we've kind of gotten to a spot where there's all these opportunities for not just the top tier athletes, but like, I mean, there's plenty of like non-competitive ultra runners who just like really good at storytelling, really like entertaining, and they can start a YouTube channel, stuff like that, and they're creating content and stuff like that. And that might be their primary goal because of their, where they're falling in the podium or the finishing list and things like that. But I do wonder about that. Like, at what point does the live stream coverage become lucrative enough for some of these companies and then the brands that support them, where they're like, you know what, so-and-so's in the race this year, I'm just going to pay a photographer to get that content for them and help them out along the way and do the storytelling for them. And then all they got to do is do the training and chat with them a little bit while they're doing it and try to ease that burden a little bit, versus them kind of like getting their own setup and spending a lot of time editing and doing all the stuff that, because I'm sure, as you know, with podcasting and everything, there's a lot of hours when you're not recording that go into it as well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'd love to dive into this a little bit because it's so interesting. Let's like a number of the bigger sports or even endurance sports, they'll have an organization and there's like appearance fees or things like that for people to show up. So they're getting money and then they profit off, say like the Boston Marathon stream, they'll make their money from the athletic association there. And then some of that goes to the athletes for the appearance fee. There's not necessarily that in trail running. And it seems like within the next few years, it will get to where there is enough money in that content game of putting these streams out there or brand partners or whatever, that it seems like there's going to have to be some sort of shift, and that some of that goes to the athlete that they're filming that's creating the buzz and the reason for that stream to be there. So I just think it's a really interesting place of, let's say in 5 years, Cocodona is getting 1 million views a day and doing pretty well. It's almost like those athletes, part-time runners, part-time 9-to-5 jobs that are leading the race or something too. It seems like there would be some sort of rights deal or something with the athletes as well. But yeah, it's just, I think I've been pretty vocal, or at least talking about a lot of the growing pains that we're going to see, because I think a lot of these things feel like it's still a small sport, but I think they're a lot closer to happening than we realize. And I don't think anyone's at fault. It's just going to be one of those things when numbers start to have 6 or 7 zeros as far as income from races or coverage, that there's got to be something more beneficial to all the participants from, aid stations to runners to videographers and everyone like that, because yeah, it's a grassroots dirtbag sport that's getting to be a lot more polished than people want to admit.
Just a quick reminder that Delta G Ketones is my go-to exogenous ketone source. You can get 20% off at deltagketones.com when you use promo code BITTER20. Check out my full description of how I use Delta G Ketones at the end of the episode.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of like a touchy thing too, because like you don't want to be that athlete who is like, all right, I'm invested in this event, but in order for me to do my best, I want as little attention from the outside recording on me when I'm in a hard spot or something like that, or going through aid stations, things like that. And then they sort of start to police that. Cause like, unless you have everyone sort of like grouping together and saying, hey, like we need our crews to be cared about us and not necessarily chatting with the live stream or, trying to talk to us when we're trying to take a nap or whatever it happens to be. But if there is like that structure in place where it's like almost more inviting for them because they get a piece of that, whether it be just like financially incentivized to be like, all right, well, we're going to, let's put some list of stuff on the things that you're going to want to capture and that we'll be receptive to. Then you can start kind of teasing some of that out perhaps. But yeah, it's an interesting world for that sort of thing. And I think it's going to keep growing. And then on top of it all, there is also just like, we have way less middlemen now than, or potential for it anyway, now with like personal brand building and stuff like that too, where, in the past it was like, I think I was talking to an agent, had been working with a lot of like pro marathoners back before like social media was a thing. And they said when they would negotiate athlete contracts, they would tell these brands to assume something to the degree of like, I think it was like 30% of what they pay that athlete to also invest in the marketing side of that athlete. Because it's like, yeah, you pay this athlete all this money and they go and they run, if it's a marathon, maybe like 2 or 3 races and you hope maybe one of them goes really well. And there's like some recognition for that. But then for the brand to really capitalize on that, they have more power in a lot of cases back then to, work with the publications and put that athlete up front and center, put their poster up in the run specialty shop and all that stuff. So there was kind of this like 2-tiered investment of like, okay, we got to pay the athlete so they can have a lifestyle that's lucrative enough to be able to do what they're doing. But then we also have this chunk of money that needs to go to the photo shoots, the promotion, and getting their name out there. Now it's like we have like, I'm sure that's still there, but it's also like a brand can kind of look at it through the lens of, well, I could pay this athlete and assume some of that, or I could pay this influencer who's already got the attention and they've already got the camera crew. So I'm really like paying them more than I would pay the athlete because they're kind of internally assuming some of that price tag that I would have to invest in from the marketing side on their own already. And that's sort of what I'm paying for when I give them money as well.
Yeah, I would love for it to be more focused on that, developing the story with the athlete as far as like investing in, say, you pick athlete A and they're going to run Black Canyon, Western, and let's say Pavlina, things people know. And it's like all 3 of those, we're going to storytell around. You might run other races. You just got to do a before and after interview, and then the videographer will shoot it and we'll cover the costs. And that's kind of just within the contract. I think that would benefit both the athlete as building their profile and the brand and storytelling, because it sort of feels like with some athletes that are good athletes, it's gotten to the point where they run in X shoe brand and that's fine, but you don't get any more depth to what happened out there. Maybe you see they came in at this split or just check the live results and see how they finish. But I think that should be a little bit more on the brand, is partnering and putting those resources in place, because I think there's a lot of demand. And just talking about Cocodona, we know there's the demand there, that is really where things grow, and a brand can add that personality to it. And that's that's what marketing's become in the 2020s is, that emotional connection, what's beyond the pair of shoes, who are the people, the type of people that wear those, and creating those stories with those races, I think is going to be a huge thing. I know Tara Dower's done some of that. And I think that that's really the next step for a lot of these brands, especially with the younger runners too, that are in their early 20s. I think that if they're breaking onto the scene now, these are like the times you don't want to miss out on, of like not that many people know about them, and you catch their breakthrough moment. That's a huge hit for the brand and the athlete, and capitalize on that. And especially at a fairly affordable thing of just a day rate for a videographer and an editor. And, you know, you're probably betting on that athlete, but they're not huge yet, so you're not paying a ton to them either. I feel like that's a big thing that we're going to hopefully start seeing, and also a way that there can be that decision with brands and athletes where they don't have to choose to invest in themselves and have to hire a videographer or something, but they can work with a brand that they're already working with to storytell out there. And in some conversations and knowing athletes, it just feels like a lot of brands aren't quite there with recognizing that that's valuable yet, but I think it is. So that's my opinion on it.
Yeah, you spoke about this at one point too, and I could totally relate to it, because as I have been doing more biking, I'm coming off thankfully I'm in a good spot with my Achilles right now, but I'm really interested in just that input in general, just as a standard versus, okay, I hurt myself, now I have to ride the bike.
Yeah.
And, you know, through that journey, one thing I started realizing was, you know, when you're on the bike, I'm doing all indoor biking for the most part. So it's like, well, what do you do? I could stare at the white wall, or I could like watch some YouTube videos, and I'm usually going the YouTube video route versus staring at the wall. And so as I'm consuming that type of content more frequently, I'm just like getting into like these pre-race type series where it's almost like the momentum and the really big awareness part is the thing leading into the event itself versus the actual result of the event and the aftermath of it. And I mean, there's value in that as well, but like, I mean, I get the best example of this right now is probably David Roche, right? So he's crushed a few races. So he's got a big spotlight on him, and he could, at this point, he could go to Western States and just totally implode. And he's already banked 3 months of YouTube content of just like the process and everything going into it. And, you know, he's kind of out there enough where there's a little bit of polarization with it too. So he gets like the growth from the people who are loving him and loving everything about it, and the people who are like, you're an idiot for wearing those ankle weights. What are you doing?
Yep.
So like to some degree, it's like from a marketing standpoint, he's already sort of tapped into a ton of the value of what the Western States experience is going to be for him without even taking a single step on the course yet. And the thing that's interesting about that too is I think it opens the door too for not just us being like, oh, we've got this sport where we've got these top tier runners that have all this content and stuff around them. You could have awesome stories and awesome content and lead up for just about anybody in the field if they are able to kind of put that right structure in place and get the message out. So I think there's an interesting like avenue there too about like just branching out from the event itself and the race recap type stuff too, where it'd be interesting to see if there was a way to get the metrics on like what percentage of your exposure is like that. I'm gonna announce that I'm doing this race, and then the next 4 months or whatever happens to be, I'm gonna be doing like a weekly YouTube series about how my training went and where that all falls.
Yeah, and I would love an athlete to come up and publicly to take a contract with someone where it basically is that you get some amount of money, but then some amount is going into building your own personal brand. And let's just call it like a weekly YouTube series where the brand funds that, but the YouTube is yours. I think that would be so beneficial on both sides, because like something on, let's just say like the Hoka brand web YouTube channel is not going to garner the same type of person watching it or the same feelings as say an athlete who runs for them. And I think that would be really impactful because you're building and promoting a brand through an authentic lens and through an athlete. You're showing the behind the scenes of that athlete, and part of say compensation is helping that athlete to build their own personal brand and platform. I think those types of things are what's going to bridge that gap of brands wondering if they should promote and sign more influencers or more athletes. Is I think it's bridging that gap and what are the skills that an athlete probably lacks, a lot of the ones that an influencer has developed. And so contributing some of that funding and that power into building that personal brand is only going to benefit both sides. So hopefully maybe someone will be able to negotiate that kind of contract, because I think that is the magic way that if you bet on yourself, that's using someone else's money to build your platform, and you can kind of create whatever you want to create at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really interesting point. There's a couple things in there. I've been thinking about this too, where it's like, because I mean I live in Austin, so there's influencers everywhere here. So
Yeah.
And I've gotten to know a few of them, and I always wonder, because I think you're spot on with that. There's this strength and weakness kind of polarization there, where the influencers are great at storytelling, they're great at getting eyeballs on them, but in a lot of cases, they're doing the best they can, but they don't always know what they're doing. So from a training and racing standpoint, so it's like, where's the opportunity for like the athlete and the influencer to say, hey, you're doing Cocodona, I'm doing Cocodona. Why don't we just do a content series together where we lean on my strengths as a coach and an athlete that's kind of gone through this a bunch more times, and I help you on that side of things. And you're the expert with the media stuff, so you loop me in on some of that stuff, and we do a collab leading into it, and you kind of have like both those skill sets just kind of feeding into one another. And I think that would be kind of cool. And it might also help with the whole like influencer versus athlete debate where there's
Totally.
I had Matt Johnson on the podcast a while ago at this point, and he gave me a beautiful sound clip during the podcast. He's like, the athletes fucking hate us. So it's like, okay, there's the reel for that episode.
Yeah, no kidding.
And I was thinking about this, like, well, yeah, like, why does that have to be? I think there's like, it's one of those things where there's essentially an unlimited amount of attention available when you really get down to it. So how do you like broaden that exposure point by working together versus thinking about it through the lens of, oh, there's X number of eyeballs on this sport, and the influencers are going to gobble up some of those, and then this is what's going to be left for us athletes, and we got to compete with them versus work with them. But then like what you said too, like that's sort of a collaboration. Brands are going to be all over that because it's going to hit everything they're trying to do. It's going to hit, especially if the influencer is like more of like an Andy Glaze type influencer, where he's going to be out at a ton of races. You're not going to see him on podiums in most cases. He's going to speak to the person who's out there grinding, and, Andy still works a full-time job. So like people probably relate to that a lot more than they do someone who's just training and racing all day. And then, yeah, you have kind of like every little box checked with that brand works with those two individuals. So, I mean, there's an endless number of opportunities, I think. So the more you think about this, the more like kind of fun like ideas pop into my head.
Oh yeah, my mind is going. I really want to see like a day in the life, like they switch, and so like the influencer goes and does what the pro athlete does in a day, and then probably is like dead after the workout and the strength session and the sauna session and whatever, and like how much they have to eat. And then someone goes and has to hang out at the fire station with Andy Glaze and run like a mile at a time and do 100 miles in a week. I think that would be such fun content of just showcasing what the difference in the two is, but also how equally demanding it's like, okay, you just did your 25-mile run and now we have to sit and edit for 2 hours. And it's just like, what?
I want the most awkward athlete to get paired up and then have to do TikTok dances. That would be the move.
Yeah. Like Jeffrey James Binney paired up with Jim Walmsley and teach him like TikTok dances after a run.
That's the content I'm here for.
It would go so viral. It would be so amazing. Like you just get let's do like Killian, Jim, and Hayden all have to get taught a TikTok dance, and you just film like the whole 20-minute process of them learning the dance and trying to record it. So that's all you got to do.
Yeah, you'd have the final cut for Instagram, and then you'd have like the 12-minute YouTube of them learning the dance and all that goes into it.
The learning the dance would get way more views.
Yeah, it would. That'd be funny. Yeah. So anyway, outside of media, I do want to hop into just kind of like your career as an ultra runner too, because another thing I find really interesting about the sport in general is just kind of the direction people come from. and how that kind of feeds into some of their success too, where one of the most interesting things to me about some of these 200 milers is it seems to be kind of this almost perfect medium of, we've had the growth of the 100-mile distances. It's gotten a ton of love over the last decade plus. And then we have these like also this growth, maybe not to the degree of the 100 milers, but these long haulers, like these Transcon runners, Appalachian Crest or Appalachian Trail stuff, Pacific Crest Trail, John Muir, all these things that are like more like multi-day or sometimes multi-week. And these like kind of, I guess you'd call them like shorter multi-days, is sort of like this kind of like, well, if you're really good at a 100-miler, you've got promise there. If you're really good at going much longer than that, you've probably got some promise there too. So we sometimes have these kind of fields sort of meet in there, and you get like just a more diverse group of kind of focused individuals kind of meeting up. Your story sort of comes from having like really long, like backpacking essentially, right? Like that's how you got into things.
Yeah. I started through hiking when I was 20. I was not that into college. So if I was going to quit college, I figured I needed a good reason to tell my parents. So I told them I was going to through hike the Pacific Crest Trail. And that was my reason for quitting college. I didn't really know that much about it. And so, yeah, successfully through hiked it, started out with a 55-pound pack and just learned how to become an adult, I think, on that. When you get, I mean, you're just finally faced with real decisions. Like if I don't buy enough food in town, I'm going to be really hungry the next 4 days. So I need to learn how to plan. I need to learn the consequences of my actions. It was like this perfect ground to just learn how to exist as an adult person at 20. And then, that fueled a love of the outdoors. And I turned that into just finding different goals and going after them. I climbed all the Colorado 14ers in a summer while working full time. And then that turned into, I quit and did an 8,000-mile through hike that I was, I guess, the youngest person to do, and wrote a book about that. And then I did a 7,000-mile one. And at that point it was like, I'm never going to have a girlfriend or a family or anything if I keep leaving for 8 or 9 months at a time. And so I started looking into FKTs and what could I do in a week or two. And so I did a number of those, like Arizona Trail and Colorado Trail, Long Trail, John Muir Trail. And then that just kind of naturally led to the Barkley Marathons. And from there, I started ultrarunning, and even the coaching side kind of followed the same thing of some through hiking. I guess you'd call it more consulting. And then it was turned into coaching some FKTs. And then that translated a little bit more into trail running and ultra running and racing from there. And I've always really loved the science side of it and poking around studies and things like that. And it's always fascinating how little people will dive into the abstracts or even just like the footnotes of a study to lead to another study and just like that. So I just became fascinated with the science and kind of built on that and started ultra running. And from Cocodona, just decided I wanted to try all the races. So I've done everything from fixed time to stage races to last person standing to all the distances. So I think in a nutshell, I just like to do everything.
Yeah, no, you've definitely shown that. And you've even compressed some of these things into a pretty tight time frame. Didn't you do like 5 long haul routes in like less than a year at one point?
Yeah, I think it was, like 5. Well, I'm not even sure which year. So I've done similar things a few times, but yeah, like 2019, I think it was like 5 FKTs in a year that were all multi-day, things like that. And then the Great Western Loop, I think, is my favorite thing. That was it's a 7,000-mile loop where you just connect 5 different long distance trails and make this loop around the West. And you have to draw up your own route across some of it and find water, and you cross the desert and stuff. I had like a 70-mile water carry that was pretty insane. And yeah, I just love adventure, new things. And like I say a lot, ultra running and even like a mountainous 100-miler, it's awesome. It's adventurous, but it's only like 75-80% of the through hiking thing that's my true love. I just can't have a normal life and go on 8-month adventures every year.
Yeah.
Just a quick reminder, Maui Nui venison is one of my favorite protein sources. The reason, they have balanced an invasive species, the axis deer, that is devastating to the Maui habitat if not kept in check, all while providing some of the most nutrient-dense meat source you will find. Consider letting them know that you heard of them from me by taking a look at their website at mauinuivenison.com/bitter. You can also check out the full description of how I use Maui Nui venison at the end of the episode.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. I think like when you get in, especially when you get into those really long things too, it seems to me just from the people I've talked to that have done those where, we're going week after week after week, there's an endless number of like logistics and things you could try to account for. And at the end of the day, like you have to do enough planning so you don't like totally like blow yourself up with something that's easily preventable. But then you also just have to have this like mental flexibility of, yeah, there's going to be things that I can't stress about going into it that I'm going to just have to learn on the fly or adapt to as they come to me. And I find that to be just such an interesting, just mental space to be in, going into this thing that's going to consume a huge chunk out of your year. And also knowing like there's going to be a lot of uncertainty in here. And if I'm not able to be adaptable to it, then it's not going to be successful.
Yeah, I think that's where I shine in my favorite thing. And just watching you're very regimented, dialed in stuff. I'm very much of like, let's plan this, but I know it's not going to work. And that's going to be super fun. That's like how I go into all these things. I was just pacing a friend who was going for the Pacific Crest Trail record and supported. And that's what it was. It was just like endless problem solving. And I don't know. I think that's the most fun thing in life is if I knew everything that's going to happen for the next 40 years, I don't think I'd be that into it. But since I don't, and I can do anything I want with that and things will go wrong and I'll have to figure it out on the fly, I think that's where the magic happens.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that actually, just in general, but also I was listening to some of your content around, I think it was maybe Kyle Curtin when he did the Colorado Trail. He sort of came up with a new, because like you have the supported and unsupported, right? So supported essentially means can you have a person pacing you the whole time then?
Yeah. So supported even more than a pacer in a race, supported, they can carry everything. They can mule you. Like I was carrying 5 liters of water and running the same pace as Nick Fowler, who was doing it and carrying most of his food. He just had on a little running vest and, we're doing 40, 50-mile sections and I'm getting the water and everything. I don't know. I've never done a supported FKT and I don't know that it's my style. I'm fine. And it can be fun to help out and stuff, but it's just too weird, I think, to give up that level of control. And it would be for me personally of if I'm low on food or I'm low on water or whatever, I want to know it. I want to be the one coming up with the solution. I want to be deciding what I'm eating. And I don't know. It's very weird because it's even in ultras, if, especially Cocodona or longer hundreds, I just did Bighorn 100 a couple days ago, and you see people with pacers and they sort of turn their brain off. The pacer can kind of be like, do you want to jog a little bit here? Or let's get this much water or this much food or something. And I don't know. I just find that to be a really weird existence that we can go into as humans. And I don't really like it. So I think I'm kind of averse to the supported style to that degree. I've done a couple things with another person as like unsupported, but team kind of thing. And those are pretty fun, but you're kind of in charge of yourself. But yeah, it's just weird when you can go into that mode of I'm letting go of all control. My team around me will take care of me. We'll see how this goes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is a really fun topic in general because it's like you especially when we get to these really long haul stuff because you have the unsupported and supported, and on the surface that looks like, okay, well, that's pretty self-explanatory. If you're unsupported, it's going to take you longer. It's just kind of a different thing. And then you're supported, it's just about getting there as quickly as possible. Not that the unsupported isn't, it's got that component to it, but you don't really compare the two. Like, I wouldn't say like, oh, well, this person did it unsupported and they were slower than this other person doing it supported, therefore they're not as good. It's like they were doing two different things. But then when you start unpacking it even further, you have like I guess with the unsupported, it's a little clearer. You're just not supported, right? But then
Yeah.
the supported, there's a whole range of different levels of support you can take on. And I wonder that's probably just growth of that sort of a project now, where like in the past, even a supported through hiker is going to get much less support than if they actually set that structure up to the degree where, okay, I'm never going to carry anything. Mostly probably because people just didn't necessarily think that that was an option or didn't have the access to the resources to be able to like, essentially have multiple people carve out the same amount of time you are to babysit you the entire time.
Totally.
It's almost like a technology breakthrough where like I kind of look at it this way too with like, okay, like if we want to look at the marathon, like super shoe and pre-super shoe, it's like there's going to be they're almost not comparable at this point. And it's like almost the same thing with like, okay, supported to the max versus kind of traditionally supported, maybe is the way to look at it.
Yeah, and it's really hard with supported because, like Francois, when he set the John Muir Trail record, the Solomon backing, Francois Dehane, he had all the Solomon backing, and they could hike in a bunch of stuff and kind of have even aid stations set up for a 220-mile route that crosses no roads. And that's pretty insane. It's awesome. It kind of shows what's possible. But I kind of think of it as sort of the Breaking Two project versus running a traditional marathon of you have this support that maybe 10 people in the world could get to do this type of thing. So the pool of people you're competing against in supported is probably a lot smaller versus when it's self-supported or unsupported. You have this, it's basically wider. It's wide open to more people that can achieve that type of thing. They can, mail out the stuff to themselves, resupply however they want. Think of it in that way. But supported is also cool in the sense that it can show what truly is possible. Like, could a human break too if we like kind of found all the rules and went up against them with everything except for they just have to run all the steps themselves. And that sort of feels like what supported is starting to become, of how much can we eliminate everything except for that person having to cover every step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like it's similar to kind of like the Breaking Two, and now they're doing the Breaking Four for
Yeah.
for the women's mile. Kind of that same energy almost, it seems. Yeah, I just think like maybe the sport will get big enough where this will be like an option, but I think it would be so much more fun, especially once you start to get onto the trails, to have like more like divisions where it's like, okay, this is like no crew, no pacer, and or just have events that are like, hey, our call. And I think there are events like this, but they're just not very well recognized. But like, I think that's just such a different skill set at the end of the day. Of like, let's say you had to do Western States with no pacer, no crew, and I mean, you could get into like
No
like
headphones, no electronics.
yeah,
Yeah, that'd be
right,
cool.
right. I think that'd be so awesome. And I think there's an appetite for it too, because I think there's enough people in the alternate community who would rather have it that way. But like, I mean, it's good to have that option too, because it kind of gets into the inclusivity side of things, where it's like, if you have a ton of support, you probably have more people who are just able to do it in general, unless we get into the world of like very, very soft cutoffs. But
Yeah.
then you also have like what you said, where like it's like you sort of get inclusivity in one side uh where on one side you have it and the other side you don't, because like if I look at it through the lens of the way you described it, you got to have a lot of money and a lot of resources to do a really thoroughly supported event, even at the 100-mile distance. Like if I go to Western States and I have two crews with multiple people and elaborate setups and things like that, it's just going to be much faster for me than if I go there and just do it completely on my own with no crew and no pacer. So to some degree, it's like having a structure where you don't need to have all that stuff to be competitive opens it up to more people. And I think like having a category like that would be really interesting, especially with the sport where it is now, where like sometimes you kind of have to race yourself towards support, where like no one's going to just bet on you if you've never done anything. So then those first few races, you're spending thousands of dollars just to do them at the same capacity that an elite athlete is.
Yeah, now we're butting up against like experience versus competitiveness too, because I think what you said is so true, that having the most ability for the most people to be successful within reason at an event is really cool, and what you're aiming at, someone to break through their limits, finish a 100-miler. But the level of support they get is also the support that the first place person will get to kind of blow the roof off the doors compared to what people got in the past too. So it's kind of tricky in that sense of, yeah, if they get crew and pacers and swap everything in every 8 miles, then they're going to be way faster, versus that might be what it takes for the last place person to even finish. Even this past weekend, just me and my girlfriend drove over to Sheridan and ran Bighorn and saw her 3 times and just grabbed some gels and no pacers. It was a really fun experience. I didn't take headphones or anything, just sort of ran the race, enjoyed the course, got the Hard Rock qualifier, and then we drove back that afternoon, and it was awesome. But it's not the fastest way I could have run the course either.
Right.
So I think, yeah, I was thinking about that a lot. Of it's so interesting how it feels like in some of these aspects, whether it's FKTs or races, that sometimes you're choosing between the experience and the result a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It gets interesting too, because I think like with with uh with the stuff that I've done historically too, like the real runnable stuff, where on the surface you would think, okay, well, I'm running around a 400-meter track. Like, it couldn't get any more simple in terms of access. It's like anyone can replicate that training environment for the most part. So like it's very inclusive in the sense that like, yeah, like, like if you decide you got the time and the ambition and the desire to try to run a fast 100-mile on a short loop that's really controlled, you don't need a lot of support, because one person can essentially help you. And if you make a mistake, they can remedy that really quickly because you're coming back around in a couple minutes. But then on the other side, it's like, that's great for access to that style of event. But when you get into like record chasing within it, which is a kind of a big component of that, because like, why would you go on a 400-meter track to do anything other than try to run as fast as you can? Like, you might as well go to the trails or something more scenic if you're just trying to get the experience. And that's where it gets really like uninclusive, or like it limits the number of people that could be competitive. Because like, if I want to decide to go after a world record for the 100-mile, or if you want to get even more in these multi-days where there's even less opportunities, you got to be willing to like travel to like a spot that has like all the measurement done. They've got like a USATF agent on there to drug test you afterwards, and like all these other things that go into making it record eligible. It starts costing a lot of money. So now all of a sudden it's like, where is the line between, we want to make sure this is recorded properly and we don't have people like running 95 miles and claiming they have the 100-mile world record, or doping and then not getting tested. And I feel like in the sport of ultra, we're at kind of this spot there where we kind of know what we need, but we don't have enough to do all of it. So we do like these half measures. And these half measures are kind of like stepping stones to where we want to be. And I've debated with myself about this, where it's like, is it better to just do none of the half measures until you're able to just apply the whole thing and then just drop the whole thing on it when it's ready, versus like really kind of making muddy waters? Because now we have like a situation where, like someone breaks a 6-day world record or the 48-hour world record, and there's debates as to whether it's actually eligible or not. And you get into all these weird little details about like pacing or no pacing, or did they get drug tested within this window of time, or was it like an hour afterwards? And it's just like, it kind of frustrates me to the degree where it's like, for one, if I want to like narrow in on like the drug testing side of things, it's like, we don't have any reasonable drug testing at the end of the day. Like,
not at all.
None. And like, so if someone breaks a record and they missed the post-race drug test by like a few hours or even a day or whatever it happens to be, I mean, like, I don't really care, because for one, they could have easily been cheating, or if they knew what they were doing and they wanted to cheat, they would have been doping during their training, because they're not going to get tested during that as far as ultra running goes right now. And then they were going to do what they had to do to get that out of their system going into the event. So it's like, they're not going to, unless they made a mistake and accidentally consumed something that was tainted, and then they kind of accidentally doped and got that unfortunate situation, or they just weren't thinking things through properly and, got caught because they were negligent to their protocol. it's just kind of a silly thing for us to like worry about if we don't have the drug testing protocol to the degree where you could get randomly selected in training.
Totally. Yeah,
So
there's no out of competition testing, so we're just fighting against almost like mistakes and stupidity is basically what we're testing at the moment.
yeah, yeah. And I was thinking about that, like just in general too, where it's like, is there like a short-term measure we could do to kind of get there before being like as sophisticated as we have for like Olympic distance stuff, where, you know, if you have any shot at making the Olympics, you're going to have that out of testing competition tests that are showing up randomly, and then you're going to have the post races. So they got it all to the best that they can. They've got that all set up. And it's still not perfect. So like, what's the best first step? And I actually think the best first step would be more something where it was like, if you're going to go after a record, you should have to maybe announce that within a certain time frame. And then like once you announce that, then you get put in this pool of out of competition testing. So rather than putting the resources at the end of the race first, put the resources into the lead up to it, because that's where you're going to potentially actually either catch people or scare people away from even trying, because you know, it could just be the odd chance that you get tested once in a 4-month time frame, and if you're not playing by the rules, you're going to get caught. So even if it's a low percentage, you know, you could still it's still a risk that you have to be willing to take, that's likely going to be more of a deterrent than what we currently have.
Yeah, and I think even if it just was like 30%, just as like a deterrent, happens after the event, immediately after, and the other 70% of tests that they can afford happen like out of competition or leading into it, kind of maybe with that same parameters that you have, is I think just something that just puts it into a more randomized scenario of like, out of the, let's just take Western because it's this week, out of the top 10, 3 are going to get tested. Who are they? It's random. We don't even know. And then, you know, coming into next year, out of all the golden ticket winners and the top 10 returners, 7 are going to get tested. Like those numbers would probably be enough to scare a number of people that potentially would dope out of doping, because that could ruin your career for life, especially the Western States policy, which I think is a one strike one. So yeah, I've talked about that with some friends and stuff too. I think the number of tests that it would take to help a lot is a lot smaller than we think. We just have to have, like you said, that announcing of something ahead of time so that you have the correct pool of people to test. But I really don't think it's this Olympic level amount of money to at least make a major dent in the sport.
Just a quick reminder that Currents is a product I use pre-workout and during events to help with blood flow, recovery, and fat oxidation. Check out currenzusa.com. That's currenzusa.com to see the 40 plus studies they have, and use promo code BITTER20DEAL for 20% off your first purchase. Full description of how I use Currents at the end of the episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. And Western States is actually set up pretty well for it, because you're just not getting into Western States in late in the game. I guess I guess Canyons, right? That would be the latest you could get in, would be if you golden ticket at Canyons. So then you would be put into that testing pool later than everybody else. But if you look at it through just like the general, got in through the lottery or got in through like Javelina or Black Canyon, you know, the majority of the training is still ahead of them. So and you have to accept so quickly too. It's not like you can sit on it and be like, oh, week before I'm going to take this, and then you're doing that intentionally to game the system. You can't even do that with Western. So that'd probably be the best one to test that out on.
Yeah, and I think it's more attainable than I think a lot of arguments and things. And I think UTMB are committed like $100,000 to testing, but it's all, most of it I think is directly or in competition type testing. So I think there's just avenues, but using some of that, I don't know, I don't like using the term, but like scare tactic or like the potential of getting busted out of competition, I think is going to make the sport a lot better than, just like you said, no one's going to knowingly show up and know they're going to test positive when they know they're going to get tested if they're doping correctly.
Yeah. I wonder how like effective even like crowdsourcing funding for something like that would be, where you could, because I think you'd probably end up getting like wealthy individuals or corporations and business that would want to match too, where like you could, I mean, you just see like these different funding campaigns that go up, and it's like seemingly people are like, oh, something happened, and then like overnight there's like hundreds of thousands of dollars
Mm-hmm.
donated towards them. You'd think with the right messaging around it and just awareness of it, you just get enough people who are like, oh yeah, I would like to know if the person I've been rooting for and following is doing things by the rules. And you can start to
Yeah.
kind of capture that a little bit. I guess the hard part is always is like, when we get to Western states, we're narrowing down to like really one aspect, when in reality the sport's massive comparatively as a whole. And it's like, how do you enter the pool?
Well,
With
and my major issue with some things as far as like both prize money and testing and stuff too is you can't rightfully take someone's entry fee that's going to finish mid pack and use
Right.
that for an elite's
Mm-hmm.
prize money or drug testing. And so that's a little bit of what we're coming up against. But then circling back to the live streaming content side that's growing and lucrative, that is benefiting the elites and also focusing on the elites is maybe that's where the money comes from. Is I think there's so many diverse income streams for all these events and organizations that you can really above board use some of the money that is coming in because people are breaking course records to assure those course records are being broken the right way.
Yeah. Well, and it could even come back to kind of what we were talking earlier about marketing, where like if I have
Mm-hmm.
a successful shoe brand or something like that, and I want to like do a fun, like I'm like buy my shoe because I'm supporting the support type of messaging. It's like, that seems like a great way to do it. I do wonder too, just in terms of, I think you're right. I think like it's not a great strategy to be like, all right, everyone pays $5 more for their entry fee so we can get this doping control in place, because it feels like, okay, we're just catering to the elites then. I wonder though if the messaging around testing is more open-ended to everybody, because I mean, you also have, I think there's probably a healthy amount of cheating going on outside of the top tier runners, because one, it's going to be easier to get away with it in a lot of cases if you're just a middle of the packer. Um, Maybe the incentive is different, but I think I'm actually scheduling a podcast with a guy who's done some research on this, where it's like, what is the drive to cheat? And like it actually ends up being like less likely to be the top tier finishers, because of all these other like social impact things of like, getting the results you're looking for, whatever that happens to be. And then it can even get into gray area stuff too, where it's like, oh, like so and so, some like 44-year-old guy's on testosterone
Mm-hmm.
replacement therapy because he probably needs, or maybe doesn't need to be, but like from a life quality standpoint would prefer to be. And then now they're jumping in these races, and no one's really like batting an eye at that, or if they are, they're just not aware of there's no one to actually pin it on, I guess, because it's just like, it's there, but there's not a face to it at all. Where you could have a scenario where like whatever kind of funding, wherever you drive the funding from, is also includes the entire field, where we kind of lean into like that percentage risk factor thing, where maybe we do 20 tests that are just randomly drawn from the entire field, which I think is what Western did originally the first year they tested. I think they had like the top 10 got tested for sure, and then there was 10 randomly drawn people from the entire field. So you could finish 256th if you were cheating and you showed up in your thing, you could get your result pulled out. So like, to the degree that matters, I mean, like when I talk to people about it, it seems like some people at least are concerned about that. Like they don't want to finish a spot back, whether it's 250 or third, because someone else was taking a shortcut.
Well, I think, yeah, and that's the whole basis for racing is on that given day, who's going to perform the best, and whether you're in a sprint finish for 100th or, going for the podium. I think that's why it's so appealing is we get so many or so few avenues as adults to be competitive with each other in a, at least societally accepted way of racing or wanting to kick someone's ass out there or something. That I think that's a really healthy in the draw of racing. And whether it's like, I live in Montana, like pickup hockey or something like that, is these competitive outlets. And you don't want to be going up against someone that is cheating, even if, you're not fighting for a win. I think that's the hard thing too, is I don't know the solution or how it matters on the grand scheme of things, but ensuring, going back to the experience that everyone's getting out there, you don't want to be sprinting against someone who's doping just to get 10% better out of themselves when you had to work 10% more to be in
Yeah.
lockstep with them at the end too.
Yeah, well, we probably aren't going to solve that problem between the two of us anyway, but hey, we can throw some
We
ideas
could.
out there.
We could maybe.
We just need the right funding at the end of the day. So our accounts are open. You can donate to them, and
Yeah, Zach's going to be the sports czar, and I'll just be the guy making jokes about his decisions.
you can make us go viral on Instagram. And
Yeah.
that's funny. Yeah, so you actually have you're doing the PCT yourself. You're going after the record, aren't you?
Appalachian Trail, actually.
Or Appalachian Trail. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Yep. I was saying Appalachian for a while, but it's Appalachian, all the listeners out there. I know now. So but
You
yeah,
got some feedback, some constructive criticism on that one?
Yeah, apparently everyone in the north who says Appalachian doesn't really care how it's said, but everyone in the south, in the Appalachians, they want it to be the Appalachian Trail. So that is what it is, and that's what we'll call it. But yeah, I'm going self-supported after that, starting in early August. And yeah, it'll be fun, mailing myself food about every 150 miles. And the record is Joe Stringbean McConaughey has it, and it's about 45 days, and we've broken each other's records for a number of years, so it'll be fun to see if I can break this one.
Yeah. Is he gonna do any trash talking about you on the way in? For us interested in the wrestling side of ultra running promotion?
I don't know. I think it's the perfect year because after, a decade of trying, he got into Western States this year. And so I don't think he cares too much. I hope we have the similar mindset of, I always think if you have a record for a year, that's awesome. And then it's borrowed time. Like they're meant to be broken. Yeah. You broke someone else's record. It sucks if it's broken like a week after, but if you have it for a while, even like your 100-mile record, I mean, I'm sure it's like, it's cool to have it, but it's also going to be cool when someone breaks it too, because that's what they're meant to be.
Yeah. I mean, I think about that from time to time too, because like when I first did a real runnable track ultra, I broke the American record for 100 miles and the world record for 12 hours. No one really cared about the 12-hour one. But like the American record for the 100 miles was something that people cared about for whatever reason. And I remember thinking like, oh, that was my first try at one of these. The world record's in shot. And, my assumption was I was going to be able to do it sooner rather than later. And at the time, I think had I broke the world record in that, I wouldn't have been in a great spot to really understand what that, like a good relationship with it, where it would be like, okay, now I have to defend this. I need to hold on to this. Whereas it ended up taking me so long to actually break it. It took me almost 6 more years to get around to actually breaking the world record. By the time I got to that, I was like, I had enough time to sort of like mature within the sport and really understand like, what am I going to do once I do break it? If I do, like, what's the next step there? Like, and for whatever reason, it became clear to me, it was like, well, it's going to get broken. Like it's definitely going to get broken. And, it's just a matter of time. So you can't go into that with this mindset of like, this is mine to keep forever. Because if it's just a losing battle. There's no way that's going to win for you. And you're just going to be just kind of torturing yourself more or less. So it's like, yeah, figuring out a way to kind of look at that sort of stuff as like, I have this goal and it's going to be rewarding to go through all the hard work that it's inevitably going to take. And then you have that perfect day where things line up and you just crush it. And that's the value there. That's the thing you actually want to carry away with it. Yeah. And then, just by the act of breaking a record is usually enough attention to the degree where someone who's capable of doing it sees it and is like, hey, I think I could do that. And then, you're basically inviting it to get broken more so than before.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm curious on how it feels after you break it, because it's probably similar with an FKT. Does it feel like a part of you is missing, almost like you've lost this direction that you pointed at for so long? Because that's kind of how FKTs feel. It's like you put everything into this, you get it, success, and it's supposed to be like glory and everything, but you're sort of just like, okay, but now what? Like I did the thing. I need to find something else because this big part of me is over.
Yeah, that's a good question. I wouldn't say I had too much of an issue with that because part of it was I mean, my thought going in was like, all right, when I finish this, the question in my mind is, can I go faster? And if the answer is yes, then I probably want to keep trying to see how much faster I can get. If the answer is no, then that just means it's probably time to focus on a different aspect of ultra running. Cause like we've been talking about, there's just so many cool different things you can do to some degree. Like when I broke it, I would have probably been, it would have been easier. The decision making would have been easier if it would have been like, if in my mind, I was just convinced I cannot go a second faster.
Yeah.
Because then I would have been like, okay, well, now it's time to get more into the trails, get more into maybe multi-day or something like that. So I think the biggest issue is just like trying to decide what it is you want to do with yourself within this sport, and then being content with whatever that happens to be. But yeah, I mean, there is definitely like, I mean, it's like anything, you spend a lot of time and energy building up to something. And then when it's over, there's that sort of like aftermath of just like, you start to realize how much of the motivation was actually like the development of getting to the point of doing it versus the actual act of doing it itself. So yeah, I guess I don't know if I answered your question or not, but that was kind of how I unpacked it in my head.
Yeah, no, totally. I think that really is the basis of, I think, everything in life, of like, that can't be the end goal or anything. You have to have that mindset of like, I'm either pivoting into the next thing or doing this current thing better, because they're in the thru hiking world. There's like this post thru hike depression term that is thrown around and very relevant, because you work for, say, a long thru hike might be 6 months. And then when it's over, like your whole way of life has to change, because you can't just eat ramen and live in a tent and walk 30 miles a day anymore. That it's just kind of interesting how it applies to the running world as well. And especially FKTs and coaching other people too, is it's just a very common mindset. There's so many similarities actually between the long distance hiking world and ultra running, even though ultra runners want to think they're way more athletic and stuff. But it's just that end goal is so big on your calendar that once you get it, you just sort of have to unpack like, all right, what was my actual why for doing that? And what am I going to turn that into the why for doing the next thing? Because the belt buckle wasn't as much of an impact on the person as they might have thought it was going to be.
Yeah, that's a really good point too, because I've had this in the past where when I finish a race and I'm asking myself, it's like, all right, was that worth it? Is it something I want to do again? I think that's always the big question I ask myself, is like, what do I actually want to do in those next months when I recover and start building up for something else? Because at the end of the day, it's like you have to, for me, I think the why has to be like enjoying that development process, whether it be on the trails or on the flat runnable stuff. And I mean, I've had phases where it's like I finish a track ultra, had a bad race, and then I'm just like, you know what? Part of the reason I had a bad race is because I wasn't as excited about that buildup, because I've just been kind of rinsing and repeating too much, and it's time to go do something different for a little bit and kind of regain that desire to want to do that style of training versus the alternatives. I think that's a big one for me, is just really being honest with like, all right, if I'm going to do this build up again, is it going to be as exciting as the last time, or is it going to lose some of that edge? Because if it's going to lose some of that edge, I'm probably going to do worse at the race. And then it's like, all right, well, why would I do something that's not as fun and then have a bad result when I can do something that's way more fun? And then if there is a bad result into that, at least I had fun doing the process.
Yeah. At least the build is fun. I mean, that's the thing you want to be the most fun anyway. That's where all the grind happens. You can make a race fun. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, so you said August is when you kick things off.
Yeah, early August, probably that first week.
Very cool. Good deal. Well, Jeff, it's been awesome to chat with you. I think I could probably chat with you for another couple hours, but I'm having Megan Canfield come on in a few minutes here to chat about Western States. So maybe I'll have to do a part 2 with you, and we can dive into some other fun topics if you're up for it.
Yeah, this was great. I love just seeing where things go, and lots of opinions. And it's great when a sport's at the point where there's a lot of things to fix, but a lot of things to talk about, because a lot is right as well. Yeah. So I think it's a really fun time to talk about this sport.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't want to let you go before you have a chance to kind of share where people can find you, like YouTube, Instagram, website, coaching, and all that stuff.
Yeah. freeoutside.com is the website. It has some coaching info there. And then it's Free Outside is the podcast, Free Outside podcast. And then I think it's the Free Outside on Instagram, but I made it to the point you can just Google Jeff Garmire and all that should pop up. So
Perfect.
thanks for
Got that
having me
SEO
on.
working in your favor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. No, Jeff, has been awesome to chat. Thanks a bunch. And I'll put all those links in the show notes too.
Awesome. Thanks again.
Thanks for sticking around and listening to how I use the show sponsors. Maui Nui Venison is a product I discovered last year. What caught my eye was their quality and business model. They have paired the need to manage an invasive species with providing some of the most nutrient-dense meat you will find. The axis deer arrived in Maui in single digits but grew fast and have damaged the local ecosystem, and if left unchecked, are projected to reach up to 200,000 in number in future years. Maui Nui decided to solve this problem and minimize waste. Axis deer meat provides 43% of your daily value of protein in just 107 calories and boasts a 1.5 to 1 omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, which is the most balanced ratio of any red meat. This same 107 calories provides 22% of your daily value of vitamins and 37% of your daily value of minerals. They have a wide range of products including ground venison, leg medallions, rib chops, strip loin, loin fillets, and loin chops. They also make a beef stick that includes an option with organ meats, which makes a perfect protein-packed snack that I will usually have in the afternoon before a strength session. I've also been enjoying the ground venison for dinner, usually paired with steamed vegetables or a sweet potato. You can find a bunch of recipes and ways to prepare their products on their website at mauinuivenison.com. Element Electrolytes is my go-to electrolyte supplement. Based on my electrolyte loss rate of 614 milligrams per liter, I begin my day with half a packet of one of their hot beverage flavors with my morning coffee. I rotate through all of them, but my favorite at the moment is the chocolate mint. Later in the day, I have been having either a packet of their watermelon flavor or a can of Element Sparkling, which is their carbonated electrolyte drink. I usually have the black cherry lime or watermelon flavor for those. If you are curious about how to dial in your own fluid and electrolyte setup, check out episode 300 of this podcast, where I dive into some of the things you can do at home to gauge how much fluid and electrolytes you may need. A free sample pack with your first purchase can be found at drinklmnt.com/HPO. Delta G ketones is the best researched exogenous ketone supplement on the market. The research on exogenous ketones is constantly evolving. Delta G is responsible for much of it, hosting 50-plus published studies and 20-plus ongoing studies, and have received DARPA grants designed for special forces. Delta G uses ketone esters, which is unmatched in raising blood ketone levels when matched per gram. The best use case, as the evidence currently stands, is as a post-workout supplement for better recovery and or during longer, lower intensity sessions to help with mental focus. For this reason, I will have a bottle of Delta G Performance, that's the little blue bottle, after my biggest workouts for the week and during long run training sessions once I have been out running for about 45 to 60 minutes. Head over to deltagketones.com and enter BITTER20 for 20% off your next purchase. Currents, which is spelled Curranz, is a pre-workout supplement that I started using this year based on the mounting evidence that has started pointing towards them as being a potential endurance workout supplement that can help move the needle on things like recovery, blood flow, fat oxidation rate, reduce muscle damage, etc. They have 40 plus studies on their website if you want to check those out. The way I use this product is when I wake up in the morning, I usually have a cup of coffee and some electrolytes and just start my day getting hydrated. And while I'm doing that, I'll have a couple capsules of Currents along with that. And then I get out for my first workout. If I'm doing something a little bit longer, like a really long ultra-specific long run or an ultramarathon race or something like that, where I'm going to be out there for multiple hours, I'll usually have another capsule or two every 4 hours while out there doing that. So I'm excited to see what this can possibly do for some of the races I got coming up this year. If you want to check them out and some of the research that they have, head over to currentsusa.com. That's CURRANZUSA.com. And don't forget to plug in the promo code BITTER20DEAL, which will get you 20% off your first purchase. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter.